Um, this is going to be a very tricky fight. Sorry, guys, if I see him somehow, I have a bit of flu, but that won't stop me from breaking down these fights. So, Ian Machado Garry versus Carlos Prates, right? Um, mm, this was one of the most challenging fights to actually predict, mainly because we are dealing with a prospect and a contender. We are dealing with a talented prospect with, I think, a talented contender in Ian Gary, right? So the main difficulty in actually predicting this fight was that Ian Gary has won every single fight that he's ever been in, and every single time, not every single fight, obviously, except the Shavkat Rakhmonov fight. I mean, up until Shavkat Rakhmonov, he was basically undefeated. Hi, Rifler, how are you, man? So he was basically undefeated when he fought the Shavkat Rakhmonov, right? And he gave Shavkat Rakhmonov his first decision, win, basically, because up until Shavkat Rakhmonov had Carlos Prates all day, lifelong. Okay, I guess we'll see. So Ian Gary gave Shavkat Rakhmonov his first decision win, which is an important thing because I know a lot of people are going to say, "Well, Shafkat was fraud checked and everything like that," of which I honestly don't believe. I just think a lot of people overlooked Ian Gary's abilities because a lot of people were underestimating Ian Gary against Michael Venom Page, and they were like, Venom Page is going to knock him out. That didn't happen. Even when Ian Gary was fighting Daniel Rodriguez, I remember a lot of people picking Daniel Rodriguez, and they were like, yeah, Ian Gary is going to be fraud checked. That didn't happen. Ian Gary has been fighting these type of fights, and throughout, he has been told he's going to lose, including the fight with Shavkat Rakhmonov, where everyone was busy saying, "Oh my God, he's gonna get knocked out." Especially, and I don't blame everyone for feeling that way, because Shavkat Rakhmonov up until that point had finished every single fight, and we can't necessarily say that Shavkat Rakhmonov was fraud checked because that doesn't make any sense, to be honest, because this guy is currently a title contender. And even if you have the easiest path to the title, it doesn't really matter. Okay, it does matter because then it would justify Kobe Covington. But when you look at the kind of fight that Shavkat Rakhmonov has been in, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is one of the most difficult puzzles to figure out in the welterweight division. Jeff Neal is one of them. Neil Magny, but at the time that Shavkat Rakhmonov actually fought Neil Magny, it was a decent fight for him. So a couple of performances by Shavkat Rakhmonov that people are overlooking purely because he won a decision against Ian Gary, and as a result, people are like, yeah, Shavkat was never really that good. And we're talking about someone who had a 100% finishing rate before he fought Ian Gary. Carlos Prates. Carlos Prates is a product of the fighting nerds, and those dudes are terrifying, man. I'm even terrified about my pick because these dudes just seem to keep on improving every single fight. Carlos Prates, like that team, except Caio Boralho, everyone in the team, or rather the main three, which is Mauricio Rufy, Gene Silva, and Carlos Prates. These dudes have knockout power. Caio Boralho knows how to win fights, but he doesn't have that exciting fight style. He just finds a way to win a fight. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the same level of skill, in my opinion, as all the fighting nerds. Then you make a good point. Ian can wrestle offensively better now that he's training with Shooter Box. Yeah, that's one of the things that I actually took into consideration. But I want to get to Carlos Prates and maybe about their history a little bit more, and then proceed to actually break down the fight and how I think it's going to play out. So Carlos Prates, as I was saying, is coming from the fighting nerds. However, the fighting nerds shoot the box are better than the shoot the box. So I don't like the fact that Ian Gary, Rifler makes a good point when he says Ian Gary is training out of shooter box, and that's not a good look. However, this fight is going to be on the feet, right? And it's not like Ian Gary is going to get there and become stupid or forget everything that he's learned. I think he's going to improve on what he already knows. I mean, we have people like, what do you call him? Charles Oliveira. You know, even though Charles Oliveira, I don't feel like has the best wrestling. I feel like his submission skills are going to be very important in upcoming fights in the future, and I feel like that's going to benefit Gary significantly. However, Fighting Nerds, we saw the performance of Gene Silva. Even though I picked Gene Silva, I was really worried about Bryce Mitchell's grappling abilities because I rated them high, especially because Bryce Mitchell was able to have some sort of success against Ilia Topuria, for example, who I think is a good wrestler. Like he started his career as a wrestler and then eventually transitioned into a striker. But Ilya, I don't know if people know this, but Ilya is a really, really, really good wrestler. So the mere fact that Bryce Mitchell couldn't do what I thought he would do to Gene Silva tells me that the fighting nerds are working exceedingly hard to improve their fighters' defensive wrestling, especially because I can tell that they have identified that their strong point is striking. So the fighting nerds, based on what I can tell, they are like an improved version of city kickboxing, right? So it's like Israel Adesanya with knockout power, basically. That's what I'm seeing from the fighting nerds because a lot of their fighters fight standing up, and it seems like they're working really hard to improve their takedown defense. So I'm worried. I don't want to lie. I don't like to be that guy, but I'm going to mention the fact that Carlos Prates smokes, right? That is not going to be good for his endurance, especially in a 5 round fight. It doesn't matter how much he prepares, his ability to endure and to have a gas tank in later rounds is not going to be the same as Ian Gary, who doesn't necessarily smoke. Smoking cannot do anything to you but deteriorate your health, even if you're still young. But if you're going to ask me who's going to run out of gas between the both of them, it's probably going to be Carlos Prates. So for me personally, one of the things that I took into consideration is that number one, who's probably going, if the fight gets to the 5th round, who's probably going to be a little bit more tired? It's probably going to be Carlos Prates because of the smoking. That his lungs are not going to be able to perform the same way as Ian Gary's lungs. And I know people are going to say, yeah, but again, Shafkat Rakhmonov, what do you call it? Carlos Prates has been knocking out people since he came into the UFC. Well, Carlos Prates does not have 100% finishing rate like Shafkat Rakhmonov. And but what do you call him? Ian Gary took Shafkat Rakhmonov to a decision, right? I think people need to understand that. Let me repeat that. To everyone who keeps saying Carlos Prates has knockout power, is going to knock out Ian Gary, that's possible. I'm not disputing that. Please do not misunderstand me. That's why at the beginning of this particular stream I said this is probably one of the fights that I had to predict because my heart is telling me go Prates, but when I analyze the fight in itself, I feel like Ian Gary has a couple of ways to actually get it done, right? So let me repeat what I was saying. To everyone who's saying Carlos Prates has been knocking out everyone since he came into the UFC, he's been knocking out who? Let me see. Who has he fought? Li Jinglian. Was it Li Jinglian? I think he fought Li Jinglian. Before Li Jinglian, who did he fight? I think he fought Neil. Did he fight Neil Magny? I can't remember. Let me actually check their their fight history actually before I get into the breakdowns. That's something maybe that I need to do. Let's first start with Carlos Prates. Um, please forgive. I'm just making sure that I give you guys the most information as possible. So yeah, it opened. So yes, Carlos Prates' last fight was Neil Magny. He ended the fight in the first round. The fight before that was Li Jinglian. He finished Li Jinglian in the second round. That's not good. That's not good. Now this makes me feel a little bit more confident in my pick. Um, it makes me feel more confident in my pick because Li Jinglian is not the same level of a striker as Ian Gary, in my opinion. I think Ian Gary, because of his height and his reach, is going to be better than Li Jinglian, and Ian Gary has better defense. And Carlos Prates had to go to the second round. Carlos Prates, playboy. Carlos Prates had to go to the second round with Li Jinglian. That's not a good sign. That's honestly not a good sign. Because, like I said, Ian Gary. No, I understand what you're saying. Ian Gary would take Li Jinglian to a decision. What I'm saying is the mere fact that, but again, people are focusing too much on Ian Gary's lack of finishing abilities. Right, that's why I used the Shavkat Rakhmonov as an example. Shavkat Rakhmonov had a 100% finishing rate when he fought Ian Gary, and Ian Gary gave him the first decision. So what I'm saying is, if it took Carlos Prates 2 rounds to actually, if it took Carlos Prates 2 rounds to finish Li Jinglian, that means if someone has better striking abilities than, and actually a more well-rounded skill set, like Ian Gary, who can wrestle but also strike, has proper reach and everything like that, they are able to be in a position to give, what do you call him? They're able to give Carlos Prates problems. And then before Li Jinglian, he knocked out Charles Redkey. Before that, he knocked out Trevin Giles. So that's a pretty decent UFC record. Four fights in the UFC, pretty decent. I wouldn't trash it. I think it's a pretty decent roster of people to have beaten in his career in the UFC. So now let's look at Ian Gary and who he has fought and how he. So obviously we know his last fight was Shavkat Rakhmonov. Before that, he fought Michael Venom Page. Before that, he fought Neil Magny. No, who's this? What's his name? Jeff Neal. Sorry. So before that, he fought Jeff Neal. Let me see. So far, all of them by decision. Jeff Neal was a split decision, and then what do you call it? Neil Magny also decision. Daniel Rodriguez, it was a round 1 KO. Song Kenan was a round 3 KO. Obviously, that one was a little bit tricky for what do you call him, Ian Gary. So obviously, the fact that Ian Gary doesn't finish fights might be problematic for most people. But like I was saying before, people were saying I picked Ian Gary. I think I've been good at picking Ian Gary throughout his whole career in the UFC. I picked him. I think I started picking Ian Gary fights since, I think this is when my channel started. Since Daniel Rodriguez, I picked Ian Gary to beat Daniel Rodriguez when everyone was like, yeah, it's time for a fraud check, and people were basing their argument on the fact that the people were basing their opinion on the fact that Song Kenan had a bit of success, right? And then he knocked out, what do you call him? He knocked out Song Kenan. He knocked out, what do you call him? Daniel Rodriguez. And then people were like, Neil Magny is going to fraud check him. obviously won a decision, and it was a decisive decision. Everyone was saying Neil Magny's going to fraud check him. He won, although it was a split decision, he still won. And then everyone was like, definitely Michael Venom Page is faster. He's going to knock him out. He's going to finish him. Won a unanimous decision. And for the first time, when I broke down this fight, and all this time I've been picking Ian Garry, even though I disliked him a little bit, but I still picked him throughout all these fights. I'm going to respond to you guys. I just want to finish breaking down this particular fight. I still picked him throughout all these fights, right? Even though at that point I wasn't too much of a fan of his, but I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. And throughout all his fights, I've been correct about Ian Garry predictions so far. I haven't gotten any Ian Garry prediction wrong up until this point, because even the Shavkat Rahmanov fight, I picked Shavkat. But even when I broke down that particular fight, I told people that I think a lot of people are underestimating um, what I've been. I'll respond to everyone once I'm done. So I think even in my breakdown of Shavkat Rahmanov versus Ian Garry, I did say that I think a lot of people are underestimating how good Ian Garry is going to perform in this particular fight. Even though I'm picking Shavkat Rahmanov to win, I wouldn't be surprised if Ian Garry found a way to get it done. And what do you know? Ian Garry gave Shavkat his first decision. So for me, let's get to the breakdown. I think we've dealt with their past opponents. So let's break down how the fight. How I think the fight is going to play out. So on the feed, let me see. On the feed, I think both of them, obviously, when we talk about who's going to have more power, it's going to be Carlos Prates. We can't even dispute that. Like, it's not even a question. Carlos Prates has the power. But when you talk about volume, who's going to be throwing a little bit more, both of them throw more or less the same amount of volume. However, Ian Garry throws a little bit more of volume. As far as defense, that's where Ian Garry shines, in my opinion. Carlos Prates gets hit a lot as compared to Ian Garry. Ian Garry might not have power, but Ian Garry has good defense, right? Ian Garry has exceptional defense. Maybe it's because he has the height advantage in most of his fights. Let's see how much of a reach he has. Okay, this might be a problem. So Ian Garry has a 74.5-inch reach, and Carlos Prates has a 78-inch reach. I'm worried now. Now I'm a little bit worried because, but let me see height. Because even though Ian Garry might not have a reach advantage, the height, Ian Garry is 6'3" and Carlos Prates is 6'1". So I think the height might even out the reach, because obviously when he leans forward, even though his reach might not be as long as Carlos Prates's, I think because of the height, it's going to even it out. Even though I still think Carlos Prates is still going to have the reach advantage. This is very important in a striking exchange, especially with a power puncher like Carlos Prates. And not a power puncher, I don't mean to disrespect Carlos Prates, because Carlos Prates is not just a power puncher. He's a technical striker, which is why I'm a little bit worried. But when we talk about defense, I'm leaning towards Ian Garry, to be honest. So, in all honesty, on the feed, I'll always be worried that this is the same logic I used to pick Alexander Volkanovski in the previous fight between Diego Lopez and Alexander Volkanovski. I was like, but the difference between Diego Lopez and Carlos Prates is I feel like Carlos Prates is a more technical striker than Diego Lopez, because I've been saying I don't have that much confidence. Even when I was breaking down the fight between Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopez, I did say that I'm not yet sold on Diego Lopez's ability to actually finish or strike. I even said that I'm worried about his finishing abilities, but when we talk about power, Um, when we talk about power, obviously it's going to Diego Lopez. But when we talk about technical striking, I'm going with Alexander Volkanovski. The problem with this fight is that I think both of them are pretty good technical strikers. So that honestly worries me. But on the feed, Ian Gary has the defense advantage. Carlos Prates has the knockout advantage. So and the reach advantage. But obviously, like I said, the height thing might maybe I don't know play a factor into that. So now let's go to the grappling. Before I tell you how I think the fight is going to play out, let's go to the grappling. So the grappling, Carlos Prates has a good takedown defense. Um, I mean, Ian Gary, we saw what he did against Michael Venom Page, and he got a lot of the takedowns that he was attempting, but it was on Michael Venom Page, so it's hard to say how good that was. Um, in any case, Ian Gary's striking abilities, I think Ian Gary is a little bit more well-rounded. Um, I'm worried, guys. I don't want to lie. Don't look at what I'm saying and say I think I'm pretty confident. I'm not. I'm honestly not. I think my pick of Ian Gary is not a safe one. My subscribers, surprisingly, I was actually surprised when I saw them picking Ian Gary. I thought they would actually pick Carlos Prates, but now shorts on the channel, I've started to include the voting numbers, and then I titled them what do you call it, subscriber confidence. So subscriber confidence, or rather the votes, basically where I think like 55% voted for Ian Gary and about 45% voted for Carlos Prates. So it just goes to show how close the fight is going to be. And I don't trust Topology as much, but even Topology, I think 58% voted for Ian Gary, and Carlos Prates like 42%. So it just goes to show how close this fight is going to be. Um, so to be honest, for me, I'm worried. The only thing I'm worried about with Carlos Prates is his knockout ability, right? But I'm given confidence by the fact that what do you call him? Ian Gary has fought a knockout artist. I think Jeff Neal might not be Carlos Prates. Carlos Prates is probably faster than Jeff Neal. Carlos Prates probably has a little bit more knockout power than Jeff Neal. However, what gives me a little bit more confidence is that Ian Gary has been in these kind of dangerous fights with people like Jeff Neal, with people like Shavkat Rakhmonov, and he's went to a decision with them. The difference with this one is, I think if it goes to a decision, Carlos Prates is not going to win. I'm willing to bet that Carlos Prates' cardio is going to be worse than Ian Gary's cardio. So if Carlos Prates is going to win this fight, it has to be in the first maybe 2 or 3 rounds. Beyond that, he's going to lose, right? So for me, that's how I see the fight playing out. If if Carlos Prates is going to win, it's going to be via KO in the first 2 rounds. Let me not even say 3 rounds. If it gets to the third round, I don't think Carlos Prates is going to win. So the first 2 rounds, that's where I'm going to be the most worried. It was similar with Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez, because obviously that's when they are both fresh and as fast as they can be. So I think that's when I'm going to be the most worried. Whether you like it or not, I mentioned at the beginning, Carlos Prates smokes, it affects his lungs. His cardio is not going to be the same as someone who doesn't smoke, because both of them are athletes, both of them train for endurance, among other things. So for me personally, I feel like Ian Gary is going to have the cardio advantage if it gets to a decision. And whoever is questioning Ian Gary's ability to take this to a decision, Shavkat Rakhmonov. That guy can submit. That guy can knock out anyone, right? He couldn't do that to Ian Gary. Quite literally, Ian Gary is the only person that Shafkat couldn't do that to. So the possibility of a decision is high, right? If it gets to a decision, Ian Gary will be the fresher fighter. Defense. On the feet, defensively, I think Ian Gary is a little bit better, but maybe that's because of Ian Gary's height and reach advantage in most of the fights that he has. But even in the Shafkat Rogmanov fight, he was still not absorbing that much damage. You know, even in the Jeff Neal fight, he wasn't absorbing that much damage. So for me personally, I feel like as far as defense wise, Carlos Prates gets touched up a little bit in the fight. Even though he gets the knockout, he gets touched a little bit. So as far as defense, I'm going Ian Gary. So far we have cardio, we have defense. Offense, or rather when we talk about volume, who throws a little bit more? Obviously, both of them, like I said at the beginning, more or less equal. But I think Ian Gary is a little bit more of a volume striker. And then, but I wouldn't even count that because both of them throw more or less the same amount of volume. The only advantage that I see for Carlos Prates is the knockout ability. That's the only thing I see for him. And the only place I see the knockout happening is in the first or second round. Beyond that, I don't think he's going to get the knockout. Right? On the ground, I think both of them, I don't know if it's ever going to go to the ground, but I think Ian Gary is going to be trying. I'm just worried because shoot that box is not good with takedown defense. They're very horrible with takedown defense. But when I looked at the fight between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler, Charles Oliveira's striking looked polished. But maybe that's because he was fighting Michael Chandler, and maybe it's because Michael Chandler is horrible, and Charles Oliveira is that good that he made what do you call it? Michael Chandler made Charles Oliveira look like he improved when maybe Charles Oliveira is still the same, just that maybe Michael Chandler is declining. I mean, we saw what Paddy Pimblett did to him. And not to take away credit, I think I already addressed that when I was streaming the fight live. I actually gave credit to Paddy Pimblett. But I think Charles Oliveira was improving. Maybe he was improving, but I would credit that to Ian Gary being part of that particular team. And Gene Silva's submission of Bryce Mitchell also worries me because I don't think the attention is only being given to Gene Silva. If Gene Silva can submit, I think Carlos Prates might also be able to submit. So the most logical thing for me the most logical conclusion is that this fight is going to play out on the feet. Both of them are not going to try to take the fight to the ground. Maybe it might be a couple of feints just to get both of them thinking about it. But I don't think the fight is going to go to the ground because I think both of them will cancel out each other. The fight will stay on the feet. And Carlos Prates on the feet, for me, has the knockout advantage. And it has to happen in the first 2 rounds. And it has to happen against someone who has the cardio advantage and the defense advantage, as far as striking defense advantage. So I respect anyone who picks Carlos Prates. You're not wrong. Like you're not wrong. I'm not particularly confident in my pick, but I feel the same way about this fight as I felt about the Diego Lopez versus Alexander Volkanovski fight. So, wow, 28 minutes. I actually think I would take this long to break down this fight. Let me respond to you guys and then go to the next fight. I didn't think I would take this long. Wow, damn it. But it was worth it, I guess. Let me see. Right, then you make a good point. Ian can wrestle offensively better now that he's training at shoot the box. However, fighting nerds are better than shoot the box. I agree. I think Gary's only chance is a clinch fest. He looks so hittable. I don't think he's that hittable, to be honest. Right? Like I knew Gene Silva was prepared for the Arkansas wrestling. Their team is good at game. That's what worries me, man. Who's this? Ryan. Prates will win. That's possible. Rifler. He smoked Magni. He did, man. Playboy Alexei Gold. Yes, Ian Gary would take Lee to a decision. Possibly. It's possible. Playboy, Leon Edwards loves the decision, so he decided to lose to Brady. Shoshat McGee, Carlos Prater is gonna smoke him like Newport, like a Newport. Oh, damn. Rifler, Ian does well against Southpaws. I saw on tape, but boy, is he hittable. I guess we'll see, man. Rifle killing Leach just proves how powerful Prates is. Nobody finishes Lee. That's a good point, but still, it just goes to show that if you have some level of striking ability, you can actually avoid getting hit by him, or rather being finished. And Lee is not the same Lee, like Short McGee. Ian's takedowns are weak. Good ground, good ground again. Just don't see him taking Carlos Prates down. I agree. That's why I said I don't think the fight is ever going to go to the ground. Venom, what up, man? Welcome to the stream. Short McGee. Ian can't sit at range with Carlos Prates, and I don't think he can take down Carlos Prates. Ian's BJJ is good, but without awful wrestling. Yeah, fair point. Ian's not 6'3". That boy lying. I mean, isn't it the UFC who does those things? But who knows? Ian also can't clinch with a guy with Muay Thai tattooed across his chest. Jeff Neal has no footwork, so Ian could just stay safe at range. That's a fair point, man. Um, you guys make good points. I'm still sticking with Ian Gary. Not a very confident pick. I'm flipping worried. I don't want to lie. I'm going to go to the next fight, which is the co-main event. What's the co-main event? I'm stopping this stream right now and starting a new one. The co-main event is. Let me actually check. Oh, Anthony Smith. I mean, do I need to even break this one down? Okay, actually, I need to. I need to actually. There are a couple of things that I feel like people are overlooking, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to now break down the fight between Anthony Smith versus Zhang Mingyan. If you want to continue joining me, let's go there. If you want to rewatch the stream, just go to the live section. You'll find it there anytime you want to watch it. Until next time, I love and appreciate all of you. Deuces. Well, not until next time, until the next few seconds or a minute or so. Ciao.